This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired.
Which one?
Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. Hausch Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Nerds. Week 3 in the NFL season. I am Jason Jarvi. Follow me on Twitter at Jarvi the King. And we got to start off with the week that was last week. Week 2. It's one of those weeks where it makes you feel and it makes you question, why do I even play fantasy football? You put all this time and thinking into crafting the perfect lineup, and then it just falls apart. That's all that happens. And that's how my season has gone in my main league, my Slackjaw league, that I've been in for 17 years. And it's Lion-esque. For all my Detroit fans out there, it's Lion-esque. Every year, I'm so happy with my team, and I feel like I have a perfect roster, that I have everybody picked out correctly. And after this year, I wasn't super happy, but I went away thinking that if everybody just does and performs the way that they're expected to, I'm going to have a pretty good year. So come week 1, I'm projected to score one of the highest points in the league. And I come out and I drop the lowest points in the league. I'm going up against Spencer Ware and AJ Green, and literally the other guy could have had just those two and any other two players, and they would have outscored my entire team, 9 players. So I come back the week after, week 2, and what do? I score a whole 2 more points. And currently, through 2 weeks, I'm the lowest scoring team. And I would really like to thank at this moment Russell Wilson, Adrian Peterson, Brandon Marshall, Demaryius Thomas, and I can't forget my old Detroit Lion, Golden Tate. All of you guys have sucked it up so hard that it questions my faith in the fantasy football gods. Now, I'm here to talk everybody off the ledge. I'm going to talk myself off the ledge because it's all about luck. That's all fantasy football is. You can put as much time as you want into this, and it's all going to come down to if a guy tweaks his hamstring the wrong way on Sunday morning. So I'm going to talk you off the ledge. But I do want to start with some happy news. That little thing that I did in the preseason called the King's Decrees, where I gave you a bold prediction that could come true, might not come true. I finally have one that actually came true, and I predicted that in the first 3 weeks, one of my starting players on the Slackjaw League would be injured, and it came true. Adrian Peterson, out for 4 to 6 months with a meniscus tear, went in for surgery today. So that's good. He says he wants to play another 4 to 5 years, but that doesn't mean anything for me or for any of you Adrian Peterson owners out there in fantasy land. To start this there's a rash of injuries in week 2. We start with Adrian Peterson. Like I said, out probably somewhere 3 to 4 to 6 months recovering from this. I think 3 to 4 months is the optimistic view, but that only puts him back playing for the Vikings for the NFL playoffs. So in most leagues, he really is droppable unless you're in a dynasty league or a keeper league where you could keep Adrian Peterson for next year. You should probably drop him and look to pick up a better option. If you were smart and you drafted his handcuff Jerick McKinnon, then that's all the best for you. I know I did that because when I drafted Adrian Peterson with the 5th pick in the first round, I wasn't super comfortable. So I definitely made it a point to go out and get Jerick McKinnon. Now, more than likely, between Jerick McKinnon and Matt Asiata it really is going to be more of a timeshare. So be careful when you are putting Jerick McKinnon in your lineup. I initially had Jerick McKinnon in the lineup for me this week, but I had LeGarrette Blount on my bench as well, who I think he's actually going to be a better option this week. He's playing. He would have played yesterday on Thursday, but him going up against the Texans, I think, is a better option than Jerick McKinnon being in a timeshare going up against the Carolina Panthers. But if you have no other better options, Jerick McKinnon he's an interesting play this week. So let's go through the rest of the injuries. There is a ton of injuries, specifically to running backs. Doug Martin, Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back, he's looking to be out at least 3 weeks with a hamstring injury. So you're looking at a timeshare of Charles Sims and Jacquizz Rodgers. And Charles Sims will probably get the bulk of the carries, and he's done this before. So Charles Sims is probably a low-end running back too, maybe a flex play, and then Jacquizz Rodgers will really be looked at to fill in the role that Sims played to Doug Martin. So I'm not starting Rodgers, but Charles Sims, I think he does deserve to get started in most leagues. For my Detroit Lions, Amir Abdullah was placed on injured reserve with a foot injury. He could make it back sometime this year, but I'm not going to hold my breath. I'm going to assume that he's going to be out the rest of the year. And, Theo Riddick is serviceable in PPR leagues, but his value still hurts in standard leagues. What I am excited about is Dwayne Washington, the rookie running back, 7th round out of Washington. He showed a lot of promise in the preseason, and I know he was playing against third-string defenses, but I'm excited to see what he could do against real NFL defenses, and I want to see if the Lions actually have a really good running back hidden on their roster that they were able to draft in the 7th round. Dwayne Washington could have some sneaky value. I would keep him on your radar if he's not already picked up in your league. And then another name you also want to think about is Zach Zenner. He made a lot of noise really quick last year, but then he went out with an injury. He's another guy who could fill that void that Amir Abdullah's having. But right now, Theo Riddick's still the only guy if you are starting him in PPR leagues. Dwayne Washington, until you see what kind of workload he's going to get, I wouldn't be starting him in most leagues. For the Carolina Panthers, Jonathan Stewart, he has a hamstring injury, and he's doubtful to play right now. So the workload's going to go between Fozzie Whitaker and Cameron Artis-Payne. And the experts they're split between both of these guys. Some are saying that Payne is going to get the majority of the carries. You saw what Fozzie Whitaker was able to do last week when Stewart went out. And I would probably lean a little bit more towards Cameron Artis-Payne over Fozzie Whitaker if you have to start one of these guys. But I would prefer not to start either of them, just because I think they going up against a Minnesota defense, they're going to have a tough time, and Cam Newton is going to want to throw the ball and want to win the game himself. Danny Woodhead, San Diego Chargers, torn ACL. He's done for the season, which is terrible news for him and terrible news for Woodhead owners because he was having a decent season, but it is really good news for Melvin Gordon owners. Now, Gordon is going to, you saw last week when there was no Danny Woodhead, he got the bulk of the carries and he finished with over 100 yards. And I think this is really good news for Melvin Gordon fans. I think he's a must start going forward right now until he proves that he's not a really great running back. So I would go forward. Melvin Gordon is a must start in most weeks. Rashad Jennings of the New York Giants has a hand injury, and he had a cast on it for the majority of this week, but he is more than likely to play. I would be very careful with him just going forward, just to see if they do cut back on his snaps. Arian Foster, big surprise. He's out with a groin injury. He's listed as day-to-day right now, and at this point, I actually don't like any of the Dolphins running backs, even if it is Arian Foster. I don't really want to start him in any league. And then Jay Ajayi and Kenyon Drake, they don't really scream fantasy football starter to me. Now moving on to wide receivers, Dante Moncrief. He's out 4 to 6 weeks with a shoulder injury. He doesn't need surgery, but it's definitely a loss if you were depending on him to be a starting wide receiver on your roster. But it does spell good news for Philip Dorsett owners, who if he's still out in your waiver wire, I would definitely go pick him up, because this is a team that's going to have to pass a bunch to get back into games, and Andrew Luck is a really good quarterback. He's similar to Matthew Stafford, where he's going to have to throw to get back in games, so he gets a bunch of garbage time yards and touchdowns, which is great for fantasy football owners. So I would expect some pretty big weeks for Philip Dorsett in the next couple weeks. You're probably going to see him get somewhere over 100 yards and maybe a touchdown or two in a couple weeks. So that's good news for Dorsett owners. Doug Baldwin, he had an MRI on his knee and it came back negative, but you're really going to have to monitor the status of him come game time. It's going to come down to a game time decision. So keep that in mind when you're setting your rosters. Julio Jones, he has a strained calf on top of his lingering ankle issue, but more than likely he is going to play. The one thing you want to keep in mind for him, though, is that he's playing on Monday Night Football. So if you're a Julio Jones owner and you're trying to make the decision of starting Julio Jones or another wide receiver who isn't playing on Monday Night Football, if you do start Julio Jones, you kind of just have to go into it knowing that you might not get the full production out of Julio, but you also get the possibility that you get 100% Julio Jones. So that's the dice you roll when you put him in your lineup this week. Brandon Marshall has a sprained MCL and more than likely going to be a game time decision. He didn't practice on Thursday, so if he does get in on Friday and is able to get in at least some limited work, that would be some really good news. But otherwise, you're going to have to wait right up until game time for Brandon Marshall. Another Jets wide receiver, Eric Decker, has a shoulder injury. He's listed as questionable and more than likely going to play. But again, game time decision. And then moving on to the Cleveland Browns, Corey Coleman has he fractured his hand in practice, which the Browns, they just can't seem to catch a break at the moment. And he's going to be missing 4 to 6 weeks. And so no Josh Gordon right now, no Corey Coleman. Your main wide receiver is Terrell Pryor, and Gary Barnidge hasn't been doing anything. So I am on top of that. Robert Griffin III and Josh McCown expected to miss lengthy amounts of time. So you have a rookie quarterback in Cody Kessler. I think the only one that really benefits out of this is Isaiah Crowell, who you saw he had a pretty good game in week 2. I think you're going to see a lot of touches for Isaiah Crowell in the coming weeks, at least until Josh Gordon gets back from his suspension. And speaking of Josh Gordon, there was some news early in the week that there was a warrant out for his arrest, which it was cleared up. It was a warrant and he's already complied. It was apparently a bench warrant that he had no idea about for a paternity test. So at the moment, he's still on track to come back, but it does got to raise a little bit of concern that this just kind of he can't get on the right track. So keep that in mind for all you guys who went out and drafted Josh Gordon kind of high. Jay Cutler sprained his thumb on his throwing hand. He's not ruled out just yet, but you're going to have to keep an eye on it. Hopefully you're not starting Jay Cutler, but if it is, you're definitely not going to start the backup in Brian Hoyer. And then some older injury news. Sammy Watkins, he's still dealing with his ankle injury, and he's listed as questionable, but he's more than likely going to play. He plays through the pain, and that's what it's not an injury, he's still healing from his old injury. And the Bills actually fired their offensive coordinator. Part of the reason they did that is because they weren't involving Sammy Watkins enough. So I think you're going to see Watkins, if he plays, be involved a lot in this offensive scheme. And then finally, Jamal Charles likely to make his season debut this week, which finally, with some injury news, we have some good news. Jamal Charles likely to play. but I think you're going to have to lower your expectations. I don't think he's going to come in, be completely 100%, and I definitely see the Chiefs that they're going to limit his touches with the success that Spencer Ware's had, even though he didn't have a great game last week. I think it's probably going to be split 50-50 until Jamal Charles really gets back up to game speed. So that wraps up the injury news, and now I'm going to start going into the matchups this week. I'm not going to go over every single matchup as I have in the last 2 weeks, but I'm going to go over the matchups that I think have the most people with question marks and who I think are going to have some good fantasy weeks for you fantasy players. So we'll start with a 1 o'clock game. The Detroit Lions, my team, going to Green Bay to play the Packers. And I think Matthew Stafford still has a lot of value as a fantasy quarterback. I think he's going to put up numbers regardless if they're winning the game or if they're down in the game. And as I talked about in the injury news, Amir Abdullah out for the foreseeable future. I wouldn't expect him back for the rest of this season. So that leaves you with Theo Riddick as your starting running back for the Detroit Lions, who he's still a really good PPR option. I think they're still going to use him like that. But I think you're going to see over the next couple of weeks them try and figure out if Dwayne Washington or Zach Zenner can be that second running back, that really the bell cow running back that Amir Abdullah was seen to be. Because Theo Riddick, he is good, but he really is more of a change of pace running back. Where Dwayne Washington and Zach Zenner both are north and south runners, and I think we've seen that Dwayne Washington has another level of speed if he gets past the first couple of defenders. So I think you're going to see a mix of Dwayne Washington and Zach Zenner this week. I'm not starting them until you see who's going to take the bulk of the workload. But Theo Riddick, PPR leagues, definitely I would still start him. Marvin Jones, probably the one bright spot outside of Matthew Stafford on this Lions offense. He has got a ton of targets, and he's dropped some balls, but he's also caught his fair share, and he's put up points for fantasy owners. So I think Marvin Jones will continue that trend. Somebody that I have to I'm starting to get a little cold on, and it sucks, is Golden Tate. I thought he had what it takes. And he does have what it takes to be a number one wide receiver, but I'm not sure if he's just not getting the right looks or if he really can't hack it. So Golden Tate, in my one league, I'm putting him on my bench this week. Going up against Green Bay, I think what he's coming up against is he's really going up against those top cornerbacks on teams. So that's one of the reasons why Marvin Jones might be being a little bit more productive in the beginning part of the season. So teams may shift towards guarding Marvin Jones more, and then you might see Golden Tate be a little bit more productive. But until that happens, Golden Tate might be on the downside. I'm not sure if I'm starting him this week. And then Eric Ebron definitely seems like he's getting it in his third year in the NFL. And I think he'd probably be a pretty good play this week. Outside of the top, and really all the top tight ends have been big question marks. I think Eric Ebron, of any of them, has potential to be a top 10 tight end this week. On the other side of the ball with the Green Bay Packers, Aaron Rodgers, even though he didn't have the best week last week against Minnesota, coming home, I think he's gonna go bananas, and he's gonna throw the ball a ton. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he has over 300 yards. With the touchdowns, I think he'll probably get 2, and if he really wants to go crazy, he'll get 3 or 4. But I'd probably put the over under. I'd probably put it around 2 for Aaron Rodgers, but definitely getting those yards. Eddie Lacy would definitely be. He's starting to be a little bit more of a question mark, but I think you still have to start him going up against the Lions. The Lions have been pretty solid against the run, but Eddie Lacy, I put him as a low-end running back 2 this week. Jordy Nelson, you definitely got to start him. He is Aaron Rodgers' number 1 target. He's actually probably his number 1 and number 2 target. So Jordy Nelson, you're definitely going to start him every week. But then you got to start questioning, is Randall Cobb worth a start? And you're definitely going to you'll probably be in some situations where it's a decision between Randall Cobb and either another wide receiver or another running back on your bench to start in that flex spot. So Randall Cobb, I think against the Lions, he'll probably get some yards. I'm not sure if he gets a touchdown, but I think he'll definitely be productive enough to be a good fantasy starter this week. Davante Adams, I don't put the production in yards. I think he's only productive if he gets a touchdown this week, which I think he might, and I think that's the question mark. But because there's such a question mark with Davante Adams, I'm not going to start him. Going on to the next game, we got the Arizona Cardinals at the Buffalo Bills, and this screams a big game for the Arizona Cardinals. The Bills haven't been great on defense. I think everybody thought that the Bills were going to have a pretty solid defense. I think they've had a lot of injuries, though. So this could be a big game, and Arizona really has put up a ton of points in the first 2 weeks. So I think Carson Palmer, he's a must start, and the guy that I really circle, and I hate to admit it, but it's David Johnson. The Buffalo Bills allowed 3 touchdowns to Matt Forte last week. Now, the 2 of them were 1 or 2 yard touchdowns. One was a 12-yard touchdown, but you can't deny that. David Johnson is going to capitalize on this Bills defense. I think David Johnson has a really big game this week. I'd probably predict him to be the top scoring running back this week. But then Larry Fitzgerald, definitely the number one option there. He's got the most targets on the team, and he's going to be a good play this week. And then beyond them, you have Michael Floyd and John Brown and Jerron Brown and J.J. Nelson. And I think Michael Floyd has shown that he is going to get enough targets, and I might actually put him at a flex play now. But everybody else, John Brown has really kind of fallen off the map. The only way that he's productive at all, fantasy-wise, is if he gets a touchdown, and I don't want to put that risk on my team, so I would probably leave him on the bench this week. But Michael Floyd, I think he's an interesting flex play. And then going over to the Buffalo Bills, Tyrod Taylor, I'd probably sit him on the bench. If he was your starter, hopefully you have somebody else on your team who you can start over him. But Tyrod Taylor, probably going to have some issues going up against Patrick Peterson and Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger. LaShawn McCoy, I think that's another question mark. He's definitely been slowed down the first 2 weeks. He does have touchdowns, which help him out. But I think LaShawn McCoy looking at another tough week going up against the Arizona Cardinals. And then you move on to Sammy Watkins, who's, as I said in the injury portion, he's still dealing with the lingering foot issue, with that still healing and trying to get that fully to 100%. But I think what you gotta hope is that he's more than likely going to play, and that they have a new offensive coordinator. And the offensive coordinator already said that they need to find more ways to get Sammy Watkins the ball. And as we saw last year, is that when Watkins is healthy and when they are game planning for him, that he can be a really, really productive fantasy wide receiver. So I think Sammy Watkins is definitely a start this week. And then you have the tight end Charles Clay, who he's really turned into a top 10 tight end. He's more on the low end, but you never know when he's going to get that touchdown that'll give you max points for you in this week. Going to the Washington Redskins at the New York Giants, I think Kirk Cousins, he's a question mark. The Redskins are putting up points, which that is the one saving grace for Kirk Cousins. I think, like a lot of quarterbacks, like Andrew Luck, like Matthew Stafford, is that the Redskins are likely going to be down in games, and they're going to have to get back. So Kirk Cousins, a very good fantasy quarterback that way. And I put him probably right around the number 10 of quarterbacks this week. Probably on the outside looking in, starting-wise. But if you have nobody else, I think Kirk Cousins will still be a good play. And then Matt Jones, the running back, still kind of dealing with that AC joint. I'm not sure if I want to start him, but if you're desperate for a running back, Matt Jones could be an interesting play this week. And then Deshaun Jackson, he is dealing with an injury and probably going to be a game time decision, but if he does play, I definitely like that matchup. And then Jamison Crowder has quietly become the number 2 wide receiver on this team. He may not be that on the depth chart, but he's definitely outperforming Pierre Garçon, and he's definitely outperforming the first round draft pick in Josh Toxin that they got. So Jamison Crowder, I think he's a real sleeper this week. He's quietly putting together. He gets a bunch of targets, and he's just dependable for Kirk Cousins. And if Cousins needs anything, is he needs dependable receivers. So I like Jamison Crowder. Pierre Garçon, I don't want him on my starting roster at all unless I absolutely have to. So Pierre Garçon, I leave him on your bench, and I might even, if you're looking to go pick up somebody on the waiver wire, Pierre Garçon may be somebody I consider dropping. And then Jordan Reed, even though he hasn't been as productive in the beginning parts of the season, you still have to start him because of that potential that he brings to your team. Going to the San Francisco 49ers at Seattle Seahawks. This is going to be a really, really tough matchup for all the San Francisco players. Blaine Gabbert, you're definitely not starting him in any format of fantasy football. Even in 2 quarterbacks leagues, you're not starting Blaine Gabbert, and especially not against the Seattle Seahawks. Carlos Hyde going up. It's such a tough matchup against the Seahawks. You saw what Todd Gurley, he did very little against the Seahawks defense because there was no threat of a passing game, and it's almost a similar situation in San Francisco. Blaine Gabbert isn't going to beat you with his arm, so they're really going to key in on trying to stop Carlos Hyde. So I don't want to start him. I think he's a low end running back too. I don't want to start him unless if I have any other better options, I would put them in over Carlos Hyde. And then all the wide receivers, Torrey Smith, Quentin Patton, anybody else you want to name, none of them have any value to be starters. The one bright spot, I would say Vance McDonald, the tight end, and I think that's only because if somehow the 49ers are able to get down the red zone, I think Vance McDonald could be a target for a touchdown, and that's where you would get your value out of him. On the other side, there are a lot of question marks, but I think there's a lot of upside with the quarterback Russell Wilson. He dealt with the injury last week. He was able to get through, but he definitely was hobbled, and it was a garbage game against the LA Rams. And I don't think, unless he truly is injured to the point where he can't play or can't produce at that level, I think this will be a good game for him, and he could turn it around. But on the other side, it may just be that he needs to heal up, and the real value that he has is in his legs, and he needs to heal to get that back. So Russell Wilson, a big question mark, but you're probably going to start him this week. Going to the running back situation, Thomas Rawls still dealing with the leg injury, and between him and Christian Michael, it's going to be a toss-up, and I don't want to start either of those guys. But if I am starting one of them, I'd still go with Christian Michael because I think they're still easing Thomas Rawls in, and Christian Michael has been somewhat dependable, but I don't want to start either of those guys if I can help it. Doug Baldwin, another guy dealing with an injury, going to be a game time decision. I'd definitely watch that. But if he is healthy, I think he definitely will produce, and I would see him getting somewhere around 5 to 8 catches, somewhere around 80 yards, and hopefully he gets a touchdown and helps out his fantasy owners. And then if Baldwin is out or if he's limited in the game, you could see an uptick for Tyler Lockett and Jermaine Kearse, and I'd probably give the nod to Jermaine Kearse just because I think Lockett is he's a boomer bust player, where Jermaine Kearse really could kind of give that same replacement that Doug Baldwin is. So I would go Jermaine Kearse and Tyler Lockett if Baldwin is limited or out, and they'd be pretty decent flex plays. And then Jimmy Graham, he saw a lot more snaps in the week 2 than he did in week 1. He's still coming back from the injury, and I think it's only a matter of time until he really gets it going again. Going on to the New York Jets at the Kansas City Chiefs. A lot of question marks in this game. Ryan Fitzpatrick, just like a lot of the quarterbacks, I think he's right around the top 10, but again, I think he's right outside your starting quarterbacks. But there's always the possibility going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. He could really light them up. If he has his wide receivers happening and they're doing their best, then Fitzpatrick could have a 280-yard game, 3 touchdowns. They have the good receivers. Matt Forte, I like him against the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't see him getting the 3 touchdowns that he did last week, but I definitely see him probably getting over 100 all-purpose yards and getting at least a touchdown. And Forte should be started in pretty much every format of leagues. And then all the wide receivers have some sort of injury, so you're going to have to monitor their status. But I think Brandon Marshall, Eric Decker, and Quincy Enunwa, it's really going to be a toss-up. I think if they are all starting, I think they all really deserve to be started because they've shown that they do run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, and they're at least going to get the yards, as we saw with Marshall got the yards last week. Quincy Enunwa through the first half had 90 yards, and then Decker was the one who got the touchdowns. So that really those roles could change from game to game. So I think Decker and Marshall are a wide receiver 1 and a wide receiver 2, and Quincy Enunwa is definitely in the mix for flex plays. Going over to the other side with the Kansas City Chiefs, Alex Smith has really become a sleeper quarterback in fantasy. He was always looked at as just a middle of the road quarterback, a game manager, but he has been quietly putting up some decent stats. And he has a really good receiver in Jeremy Maclin, and Travis Kelce will contribute what a pretty good tight end will do. And then, who knows, maybe with Jamal Charles coming back, with the emergence of Spencer Ware, Alex Smith could be a top 10 fantasy quarterback this year. So I think Alex Smith, I like him as a sleeper fantasy play this week. And then it is the running back situation is going to be a question mark of how much are they going to play Jamal Charles, and what kind of value are you going to get from Spencer Ware now? So I think this might be, depending on how Jamal Charles comes back, this might be the last week where Spencer Ware really makes any sort of difference for fantasy teams. Because if Jamal Charles comes back and he's fully healthy and he's the running back that we all hope he is, then Spencer Ware, he goes back on the bench and it's Jamal Charles' team. So I would still start Spencer Ware, and if you're a team who has Jamal Charles, unless you have a better running back, I'd probably plug him in just to see maybe he does have one of those gigantic 150-yard, 3-touchdown games. But I think more than likely it'll be a 50-50 split. Jeremy Maclin is definitely a start. He's the only wide receiver that Alex Smith looks at, so Jeremy Maclin is a must-start. And then the only other receiving option, aside from the running backs, is Travis Kelce, the tight end. So I think he's also definitely a start. He's in that top 10 of tight ends. So that's really the Kansas City Chiefs in a nutshell. And I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, I'm going to wrap up the rest of the matchups that I have highlighted for you guys, and then I'll give you my starts and sits of the week. You're listening to the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. The Fantasy Nerd Show is sponsored by the Fan Up Network. They've developed the ultimate fantasy football app. It's a one-stop shop for everything you need. You can track teams and scores across multiple platforms, get latest injury and player news, and access to expert advice. See the hot trends with waiver pickups and drops. It has everything you need to manage all your fantasy football teams. Android users can get the app in the Play Store, and an iPhone version is now available in the App Store. Go to fanupnetwork.com to learn more and follow them on Twitter at fanupnetwork. Welcome back to the Fantasy Nerds. We're about to wrap up the rest of the matchups that I've highlighted for you all, and then we'll go into the sit and start of the week. So the next matchup I have listed is the San Diego Chargers at the Indianapolis Colts. And I think this could be a high-scoring game. Now, I know I pointed out last week a couple of games that I thought were going to be high-scoring. I think in particular, the one that really sticks out was the Saints and the Giants. And that was essentially just a big snooze fest. So I'm going to get something wrong every now and then. But I think you're gonna trust me that I am doing my research and giving the best information that I can to you. And I think if there's any game that is going to be a shootout, I think this has all the possibilities. Phillip Rivers, even though Keenan Allen went down, even though Danny Woodhead went down, he has some big play receivers on that team. Travis Benjamin, you saw last year what he was able to do with Josh McCown. Now in a starting role with a better quarterback, he's able to produce. So I think Phillip Rivers, and along with Tyrell Williams, I think Phillip Rivers, I think he has a big game against these Indianapolis Colts. You saw what Matthew Stafford was able to do in Week 1. I think Phillip Rivers is able to do the exact same thing. And then Melvin Gordon, the running back, I said before, with Danny Woodhead out, it's really good for Melvin Gordon owners. Amir Abdullah and Theo Riddick were able to run all over the Indianapolis Colts. I think Melvin Gordon is able to do the exact same thing, so I really like him this week. You should have him in your lineup. Travis Benjamin, I think at this point you kind of have to put him in your lineup. Even if you put him in as a flex, I think he's a really good play, and this is a really good matchup for him. They had the Indianapolis Colts have a depleted secondary, so Travis Benjamin going to have a good game. And Tyrell Williams, I think he's the guy who, he's the question mark. If he gets a touchdown, he's definitely a better play. I think at best you're putting him in as a low-end flex play, but he has all the possibility of getting a bunch of yards and getting a touchdown. Now, at tight end, Antonio Gates has been really good for so long, and at this point I'm kind of on him until I'd rather play somebody else over Antonio Gates until he proves that he's the guy that he was a couple years ago. Otherwise, I'd probably just leave him on your bench. On the other side of the ball, you got the Indianapolis Colts and Andrew Luck. If they are down in this game, he's going to have to throw the ball. So that might mean that he's thrown a couple interceptions. Maybe he's fumbled the ball. But I think he will end up getting somewhere around 300 yards passing and at least 2 touchdown passes in this game. So Andrew Luck, still a really good play. You should be starting him. Frank Gore, somehow he's able to defeat time and still be a relevant running back for fantasy owners and an NFL running back. So Frank Gore, I think he's a low-end running back too, but you probably should be starting him because there's been so many injuries to running back. You probably have to start Frank Gore at this point. T.Y. Hilton, I think just because he is the number one guy on Indianapolis, he's going to get targets and he's going to get catches, and I bet he's probably the first guy who's going to get a long touchdown for the Indianapolis Colts. Now, with Dante Moncrief out for a couple weeks, I think that really boosts the productivity for Philip Dorsett, and I would put him as a sleeper this week. I think he could have a really big game. He's shown that he has that big play ability in the first 2 weeks, so I think Philip Dorsett probably, he's a good play. I think I put him in a flex position in a lot of leagues this week. And then the tight end situation is a toss-up. And with Dwayne Allen and Jack Doyle, if I'm starting one of them, I'm starting Dwayne Allen just because I don't know which one of those guys is going to get the touchdown. And that's really where the value comes from him. I don't want to start Dwayne Allen. I'd probably put him outside of my top 10 tight ends. But if you have him on your team, he's not a horrible play. Who knows? Maybe he gets a touchdown. That's what he did against the Detroit Lions. Going to the next matchup, you got the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Philadelphia Eagles. The two teams from Pennsylvania, they're both 2-0, and they look like okay. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers look a little bit better than the Eagles, but the Eagles, I think, are trending up. With the Steelers, Big Ben, definitely a starting quarterback, and he's got a lot of options to throw to. D'Angelo Williams, this is week 3. Le'Veon Bell comes back next week, so it's really the last chance that you can hope to get a ton of production out of D'Angelo Williams, so you're definitely starting him. If anything, I would try to trade him at this point. If you can get any sort of value for D'Angelo Williams right now, I would definitely do that. Even though I think Le'Veon Bell he'll probably miss a game here or there through the rest of the season, but you probably should try and get whatever value in a trade for D'Angelo Williams at this point, unless you're a Le'Veon Bell owner, or even if you are a Le'Veon Bell owner, trade D'Angelo Williams, try to get whatever you can, because more than likely Bell will be productive the rest of the season, and D'Angelo Williams' stock drops a lot. Antonio Brown, a must start. I got to say that I'm in a league with family and friends, and my parents, for the first time, they're playing fantasy football, and I go over to them, and they're asking me for fantasy football help, and I take a look at their lineup. They had the first pick in our draft, and they took Antonio Brown, and the first thing I see in their lineup is Antonio Brown on the bench, and I'm like, what are you guys doing? Antonio Brown, even if he has a bad matchup, you still play Antonio Brown, and you're going to play him all year until he gets hurt, which hopefully for you Antonio Brown owners, he does not get hurt. You have the return of Marcus Wheaton this week, which I think that's a big question mark. It really throws into question the value of all the wide receivers there. Marcus Wheaton, Sammy Coates, and Eli Rogers. You saw the first week, Eli Rogers was the one who got the second most targets. And then last week it was Sammy Coates. And now Marcus Wheaton coming back off of injury. They want to give him every shot to be that number 2 wide receiver. So I would probably stick away from all of those guys at this point. I might give an edge to Marcus Wheaton because maybe they push the ball to him a little bit this week to see what he can do. But after this game, we'll have a better idea of who the number 2 wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers is. And the guy that I told you last week is going to be a sleeper tight end, Jesse James, went out and got a touchdown, which hopefully helped a bunch of you. But I think he's going to continue being a red zone threat. So Jesse James, I probably put him... He's in the top 10. He's in the lower part of the top 10 tight ends. And I still think for some reason, Big Ben loves to throw it to his tight ends. He always did it with Heath Miller. And now I think with Jesse James, it's going to continue. So I think Jesse James is another sleeper start this week. On the opposite side with the Philadelphia Eagles, Carson Wentz has quietly been an average fantasy quarterback. I started him last week over Russell Wilson, and he did score more points, but it wasn't enough to propel me to a victory. But Carson Wentz, I think going forward, you probably shouldn't start him unless you're horrible at quarterback in front of him. But I think he's a pretty decent backup quarterback right now. So I think Carson Wentz, he should be rostered, or at least keep him on your radar. Ryan Matthews, another guy who's quietly been okay. He's been scoring touchdowns, so that gets you points, but you want to see a little bit more production out of him. I have him probably at a low-end flex play. And then Jordan Matthews, though, probably the best benefactor of Carson Wentz. He's getting a ton of targets, getting the yards, and I think he's exactly what Carson Wentz is exactly what Jordan Matthews needs, so he's a really good play. He should be started as a wide receiver. And then Nelson Aguilar slowly gaining the confidence of the Philadelphia Eagles again. And I'm not starting him at this point, but I think you really should be looking at him either on your radar at the waiver wire or putting in a submission for him to keep him on your bench, because Carson Wentz looks like he's going to throw the ball around. And there are comparisons between him and Ben Roethlisberger. And if he can get any sort of production like Big Ben, there's enough for 2 wide receivers. So Nelson Aguilar is a keep him on your radar guy, but not starting him just yet. And I told you, like I said, with the Steelers, Jesse James, I said he was a sleeper. Another guy that I want to put on your radar is Trey Burton on the Philadelphia Eagles, who came out of nowhere really and had a couple catches and almost caught a touchdown on Monday Night Football. I put him as a sleeper tight end at the moment. I wouldn't put him in your lineup, but definitely keep him on your radar. Going on to Sunday Night Football, we got the Chicago Bears at the Dallas Cowboys, and I think this is the game that the Dallas offense finally gets it together. They've been dealing with the rookie quarterback, Dak Prescott, and he hasn't made any mistakes, but I think this is the week that he finally figures it out. I would put Dak Prescott as a sleeper quarterback this week. I don't want to put him in the top 10, but I really have a feeling that on Sunday Night Football, he's going to go out and they're going to lay the hammer to the Chicago Bears. So I think he's going to have a good week. I think Ezekiel Elliott, he's going to figure it out, and I think he's going to pay off all you people who picked him in the first round. Ezekiel Elliott, I think he'll have a good week this week. And then Des Bryant, Cole Beasley, they've got the yards, they've got the catches, they just haven't got the touchdowns. I think both of them at least get one touchdown this week. And Jason Witten, he's a dependable tight end. He's in those top 10. I think you're starting them. So I think you can start all of the starting offensive cast from the Cowboys. The one question mark I put at Dak Prescott, only because I think there's quarterbacks who are better than him, but I have a feeling about him. On the other side of the Chicago Bears, lots of question marks. Jay Cutler dealing with his thumb injury, unlikely to play, so you got Brian Hoyer coming in. I don't like either of those guys to start. Jeremy Langford has shown that he's going to get the ball enough that he's going to be productive, so I think he's a running back 2 at best, and I'd rather have him as a flex play. Alshon Jeffrey, probably going to be a game time decision he was listed on the injury report, but if he is playing, he's really the only wide receiver who's going to get you any points on the Bears. Kevin White has been somewhat of a letdown this year. I think people had really high expectations for him, and I think they wanted him to be better than Alshon Jeffrey, but he just hasn't come into his own just yet. I think Eddie Royal is even outperforming him at this point. So if I have to rank the Bears wide receivers, I'd probably go Alshon Jeffrey, Eddie Royal, and Kevin White at this point. But I'm only starting Alshon Jeffrey in most leagues. And then Zach Miller, the one upside with him is if Brian Hoyer plays, he's probably going to check down a bunch, so maybe Zach Miller gets some garbage reception. So I don't want to start Zach Miller, but if you have issues at tight end, I wouldn't hate starting him. And then the last matchup I have for you is Monday Night Football. Atlanta Falcons at the New Orleans Saints. Matt Ryan has been one of the best fantasy quarterbacks this year, at least through 2 weeks. And I think that's going to continue going up against the New Orleans Saints. I think he'll have a good game. At running back, Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman, it really is a toss-up. And I think Devontae Freeman probably wins out more than not. You're going to start him. You drafted him to be your starting running back. And Tevin Coleman, I don't feel comfortable. He had that really big first week and then not so much in week 2. So Tevin Coleman, I do kind of cool down a little bit on. Hopefully you have better options to put in a flex. But Tevin Coleman, I would probably want to leave him on my bench this week. Julio Jones, again, dealing with his injuries, likely to play. And even if he is banged up, you're going to start Julio Jones because you drafted him. He's like Antonio Brown. Regardless of his injury status, you're going to hope that Julio Jones gives you one of his 15-catch, 200-yard, 3-touchdown games. But you got to just hope for the best with Julio Jones. And then Mohamed Sanu, I think he's definitely at least a flex play at this point. He's shown with what Matt Ryan has been able to do. He's been a really complimenting second wide receiver on that team. So I think you start Mohamed Sanu. And then all with my sleeper tight ends, Jacob Tamme. He got a touchdown last week. So I think he's really worked his way into the top 10 of tight ends at the moment, at least, until the Rob Gronkowskis and Jordan Reeds and hopefully the Gary Barnages really pick up their play and are able to get back to their status. Jacob Tamme, at the moment, he's a top 10 tight end. I think I start him in this matchup. And then on the other side of the ball with the New Orleans Saints, Drew Brees, he's been doing what he's always been doing. Drew Brees is a must start. And then you have Mark Ingram, who people have had high hopes for him in the past couple of years. They've had even higher hopes this year. They saw what he was able to do last year before he got injured, and they thought he was just going to carry on. I think Ingram has ran into some tough defenses, And hopefully Mark Ingram can pick it up, and I don't think it's time to abandon ship just yet on Mark Ingram for the New Orleans Saints. And if anything, I would, just like Todd Gurley, I would try to buy low on Mark Ingram if you can. If you can trade, a couple bench wide receivers to get Mark Ingram, that might solidify your running backs on your team. With Brandon Cooks and Willie Snead, those guys are must-starts at this point. With the way that Drew Brees is producing, Snead and Cooks are both going to get their yards at this point. Until one of them pulls a hamstring, they're going to get probably close to 100 yards each, and one of them will at least get a touchdown, if not both of them. And then Michael Thomas, the rookie wide receiver who was really thought to be the replacement for Marcus Colson, he started coming along in week 2, and it's somebody you got to put on your radar. And if somebody hasn't picked him up on your waiver wire, I would consider putting Michael Thomas on your bench because he's gonna be a decent bye week replacement for you. And then Kobe Fleener also started getting it right in week 2. I'm still putting him on the outside of the top 10 of tight ends right now, because there are other guys like Jesse James, like Jacob Tamme, who are producing better than him. So until he gives me a couple consecutive weeks and shows that he can give similar to the production of when Jimmy Graham was on the Saints, I'm probably going to ride him on the bench. That wraps up my predictions for the matchups this week. And before I get out of here, I'm going to give you my starts and sits of the week. Now, I don't want to toot my horn too much. I mean, I do like tooting my horn, if you ask my wife. But, again, week 1, I started off a little rocky on the starts and sits. I went 3-3, but in week 2, I went a perfect 6-0. I told you to start Matt Ryan, TJ Yeldon, and Willie Snead, and all those guys did pretty solid. TJ Yeldon, I gave it to him because he had 8 receptions, and in PPR leagues, that's 8 points. That's going to help you out a ton. And then for sits, I told you to sit Russell Wilson, Todd Gurley, and Randall Cobb. And all those guys didn't really do very well. I started Carson Wentz over Russell Wilson, and he scored more. So I count those as all. I got those right. So I went 6-0 in week 2, and I'm going to try and improve on that in week 3. So starting at quarterback, I just finished up telling you about him. Dak Prescott, I think he's going to have a big week this week. And if you have the ability to start this guy, if you have Tom Brady and you have Dak Prescott on your bench and you're waiting for Tom Brady to come back, this is the perfect opportunity to put Dak Prescott on your team, because I think he's going to get it right, figure it out, and shred the Chicago Bears. Conversely, the sit of the week, very surprising, and I might be wrong, might kick myself for it, but I think Cam Newton going up against the Minnesota Vikings, he's going to have a tough matchup. Now, he'll probably still get a bunch of yards, at least a touchdown or so, but I think you're going to see more like in week 1, where you get average Cam Newton as opposed to Superman Cam Newton. So that's why he's my sit of the week. Going on to running back, I think Jerick McKinnon, even though it's a tough matchup at Carolina, I think the running back for Minnesota, Jerick McKinnon, taking the place of the injured Adrian Peterson. It's just a gut feeling, but I think McKinnon figures it out and he gets close to 100 yards and hopefully a touchdown. On the other side, with the sit of the week for running back, I go with C.J. Anderson, running back for the Denver Broncos. Going at Cincinnati, the Bengals just have a stout defense, and I think C.J. Anderson going to have a tough time this week trying to run the ball. Even though he's looked good in week 1, week 2, I think you see him cool off a little bit at Cincinnati. And then at wide receiver, I said because Dante Moncrief going to be out a couple weeks and the Colts are going to have to throw the ball, Indianapolis Colts wide receiver Philip Dorsett, he's my start of the week. Teams are absolutely shredding the San Diego Chargers, and I think at home the Colts are going to want to put the ball up a bunch, so I think Philip Dorsett has a big game this week. On the other side, another big name who I'm telling you to sit, but you're not going to sit, of course. Odell Beckham Jr. going up against the Washington Redskins. And the one big reason why I think he's going to have a bad week this week is because he's going up against Josh Norman, the guy that he hit in the head. He fought all last year when they played Carolina. I think it's gonna be a mind game, and maybe Odell Beckham, maybe he wins the battle this time, but I think you're gonna see Josh Norman on him all game, and that's why OBJ is gonna suffer this week. And that wraps up my starts and sits for week 3. And that about wraps up this episode of the Fantasy Nerds. I hope you all the best this week. Hopefully we don't have another rash of injuries where it just cripples everybody's fantasy teams and we have to start all over. But even if that happens, I am still here to guide you through week 4 and beyond. I hope I talked a lot of you off the ledge. I know this episode really helped me get through that horrible week 2. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at Jarvi the King. I will get back to you as soon as I can. But until next week, good luck here in week 3. Later, nerds.